Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a subject that's both abstract and incredibly real, the intricate dance between philosophy and punishment.
Yeah, it's a deep one.
We've got a fascinating collection of sources lined up for you, everything from, deep dives into Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment to sociological studies that try to get to the heart of why and how societies punish.
And our goal in this deep dive really is to unearth the fundamental philosophical ideas that lie beneath our justice systems.
Right.
We'll explore how a literary masterpiece can shed light on these concepts, and we'll also examine sociological research into the practical aims and, the real-world effectiveness of different approaches to crime and corrections.
Okay, so to kick things off, let's think about how philosophy and literature even connect. We often think of literature as storytelling, plot twists, compelling characters, that kind of thing.
Sure.
But our sources point to something much deeper.
Absolutely. Literature does more than just entertain. It can actively grapple with and portray philosophical concepts in action. Authors build entire fictional worlds populated by characters whose choices and motivations are rooted in specific philosophical principles.
Uh-huh.
And this gives us, a unique opportunity to see those philosophies play out, to witness their consequences in the human context, and ultimately evaluate their strengths and weaknesses.
Exactly. Think about Dostoevsky, of course, but also Orwell's Animal Farm. That seemingly simple story about farm animals is, well, it's a powerful commentary on political philosophy, showing how even idealistic revolutions can just sort of devolve into tyranny.
Yeah, a classic example.
And this isn't a new idea. Plato, centuries ago, believed that literature had such a profound influence on our ethical understanding that he even proposed censorship in his ideal republic.
Which is pretty extreme, but it shows how seriously he took its power. What's really interesting, though, is the more recent philosophical engagement with literature. Well, it's viewed not just as a potential corrupting influence, but as a vital means of communication, a mirror reflecting cultural values, and even sometimes a legitimate form of philosophical inquiry itself.
Like Plato's dialogues.
Exactly. Philosophical arguments presented through dramatic conversations. Or, moving forward, think about someone like Ayn Rand, whose novels explicitly champion and explore her philosophical viewpoints through her characters and their actions.
Right. The fiction serves the philosophy.
And it's not just about illustrating existing philosophies. One of our sources quotes William Charlton, who suggests that literary and philosophical talent are often intertwined.
Interesting. Why?
Well, both fields strive to persuade,
Yeah.
right, and to offer profound insights into human psychology. They both rely heavily on the nuanced power of language to achieve those aims. They're kind of tapping into a similar wellspring of human understanding.
Okay, that makes sense. They're both trying to get at deeper truth about us.
Precisely. So, with that connection between philosophy and literature firmly in mind, let's turn our attention to Crime and Punishment and explore how it tackles some weighty philosophical questions, specifically nihilism and utilitarianism.
Nihilism, that sounds pretty, well, absolute. One of our sources describes it as a 19th century Russian philosophy that's all about negation.
Yeah, negation. The belief that all values are essentially baseless and that true knowledge or meaningful communication is maybe impossible.
Wow.
It's a very radical skepticism that can lead to a rejection of laws, institutions, and even hint at a slide into anarchy and destructive behavior.
So what's at the core of it?
The core of nihilism really lies in its assertion of purposelessness. Nihilists often argue that objective meaning, things like religious faith or traditional moral codes, aren't just wrong, but fundamentally hypocritical. They see existence as inherently without intrinsic meaning. This kind of resonates with later existentialist ideas like Sartre's notion that existence precedes essence. We're born without a predefined purpose and must create our own meaning in what is ultimately a meaningless universe.
Okay, I see the connection. And then we have utilitarianism, which takes a very different tack, focusing on the ethical principle of maximizing happiness.
For the greatest number of people.
Right. So how does Raskolnikov, the central figure in Crime and Punishment, navigate these contrasting ideas? He seems caught between them.
He really does. Raskolnikov presents a compelling and ultimately tragic case study in how nihilistic ideas can intertwine with a distorted understanding of utilitarianism.
How does that work?
Well, he harbors this deep belief in his own exceptionalism, viewing himself as a kind of extraordinary man who stands above conventional morality and the constraints of law. That's a distinctly nihilistic perspective.
That the rules don't apply to him.
Exactly. But simultaneously, He attempts to justify his murder of the pawnbroker through a twisted utilitarian rationale, believing that eliminating a, quote, harmful individual and using her wealth for the greater good will ultimately benefit society.
So it's like he's thinking, my belief in my own superiority and the meaninglessness of conventional rules, that's the nihilism, gives me license to ignore those rules in pursuit of a supposedly better outcome for society. That warped utilitarianism.
Exactly, you've nailed it. The conversation Raskolnikov overhears in the bar, where students debate the potential benefits of killing a despicable pawnbroker to alleviate suffering. That's a critical example of this distorted utilitarian logic that profoundly influences his thinking.
Oh, okay.
And his internal justifications before and after the murder, his sort of intellectual gymnastics to rationalize his actions, really highlight this dangerous convergence of philosophies.
But the novel doesn't exactly portray these ideas leading to a positive outcome, does it? I mean, I vividly remember his overwhelming emotional turmoil, the crushing guilt and paranoia that just consume him.
No, not at all.
It's as if his intellectual convictions are in constant, brutal conflict with his basic human experience, his conscience.
That internal conflict is absolutely central to the novel. Dostoevsky seems to be illustrating the destructive potential of both nihilism and this perverted utilitarianism,
Yeah.
showing how they lead to immense suffering and societal breakdown, not just for Raskolnikov, but for those around him as well. The novel, really in its entirety, appears to be a powerful critique of these philosophies in action.
It really feels that way.
And as one of our sources points out, Raskolnikov's deeply contradictory nature, his capacity for both cruel acts and moments of unexpected compassion, like giving money to the Marmeladov family only to immediately question his own motives, that's a driving force of the narrative.
It's this constant push and pull within him. Okay, so literature can really delve into the why behind our actions and beliefs, often in profound ways. But let's pivot now and consider the philosophy of punishment itself. Why do we as a society even feel the need to punish individuals who break our established rules?
That's the foundational question, isn't it? And it's one that has occupied human thought for millennia.
Right.
Our sources touch on Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, which, even in its depiction of an early colonial society striving for moral purity, immediately establishes the necessity of a prison.
Yeah, even in their perfect society.
It underscores this early recognition that even in seemingly utopian ideals, the reality of human fallibility and the need for mechanisms of punishment are, well, unavoidable.
And the way we punish hasn't always been this formalized system we have today, right? Initially, it seems like punishment was a much more personal affair.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
With the injured party or their family often taking on the role of administering justice, or maybe more accurately, revenge.
Which could get out of hand fast.
Precisely. But as societies evolved, the state gradually assumed the responsibility for punishment, largely to prevent those escalating cycles of revenge, those tit-for-tat blood feuds, as one source describes them, which only serve to perpetuate injustice and instability.
Okay, so the state steps in for stability.
Yes, but early state-controlled punishment was often characterized by extreme brutality and a strong element of retribution, sometimes even justified through religious dogma as a means of, expiating sin.
Sounds pretty rough. Thankfully, the Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason and individual rights, brought about a significant shift in how people thought about law and the justification for punishment.
Absolutely. The Enlightenment gave rise to the classical school of penology, with Cesare Beccaria as a pivotal figure. His seminal work, On Crimes and Punishments, stands as a powerful manifesto for legal and penal reform.
Right, pushing for a more rational approach.
Advocating for a more rational and humane approach to justice, exactly.
Beccaria argued that the primary purpose of laws should be to preserve public safety, not simply to exact revenge. He championed the importance of fair and transparent trials, public proceedings where the accused could confront their accusers, and insisted that punishment should be proportionate to the crime committed, applied equally to all individuals regardless of their social standing.
And Beccaria placed significant emphasis on the deterrent effect of punishment, highlighting the importance of certainty, swiftness, and a degree of severity.
Okay, those three.
Yes, but interestingly, he argued that the certainty of being caught and punished was a far more effective deterrent than the extreme severity of the punishment itself.
Ah, okay. Certainty over severity.
If people believe they can get away with a crime, even a harsh penalty might not dissuade them.
Which makes intuitive sense, doesn't it? If the chances of getting caught are slim, the potential punishment might seem like a distant and unlikely consequence.
Precisely.
Now, another key figure from this era is Jeremy Bentham. and his influential principle of utility.
Ah, Bentham. His philosophy of social control centered on this concept of utility, the idea that actions should be evaluated based on their impact on the overall happiness of the community.
The greatest good for the greatest number.
That's the one. He posited that human behavior was fundamentally driven by the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. It's fascinating, actually, to consider how modern debates around cost-benefit analysis in criminal justice policies are, in essence, contemporary applications and sometimes misapplications of this core utilitarian principle.
So he essentially viewed humans as rational beings, constantly weighing the potential pleasures and pains associated with their actions, what's often referred to as the hedonistic calculus.
Yes, that's the term.
This sounds like it forms the very foundation for the classical understanding of why people commit crimes and how to prevent them. It's like someone weighing the potential thrill of speeding against the risk of a tiny example of this calculation in everyday life.
Exactly. A micro version of it. The idea is that if the pain of punishment is perceived to outweigh the potential pleasure derived from the crime, a rational individual will be deterred from engaging in that behavior.
Which leads us nicely into the major justifications for punishment that are still debated and used today.
Right, the different rationales.
We have retribution, which is all about just desserts. The idea that punishment should be proportionate to the harm caused, giving offenders what they morally deserve, and reaffirming their responsibility.
Kind of an eye for an eye, but ideally more measured. Then there's deterrence, which focuses on preventing future criminal behavior.
Okay.
This can be general deterrence, where punishing an offender serves as an example to discourage others, or specific deterrence, aimed at preventing that particular individual from reoffending.
And the certainty thing comes back here.
It really does. As Beccaria emphasized, and as much research suggests, the certainty of punishment is a more significant factor in deterrence than its severity. Unfortunately, the low crime clearance rates in many jurisdictions kind of undermine this principle of certainty.
Right, if you don't think you'll get caught.
Exactly.
And then we have incapacitation, the straightforward approach of preventing crime by physically removing offenders from society, most commonly through imprisonment.
Yeah, taking them off the streets.
Yeah.
Though there are ongoing debates about the effectiveness of incapacitation, the significant financial costs involved, and the ethical implications, of course.
And that idea of selective incapacitation.
Right, which attempts to identify and incarcerate individuals deemed to be high-rate or dangerous offenders. But this raises really complex challenges in terms of prediction and the potential for error and bias.
Tricky stuff.
Very. And we shouldn't overlook rehabilitation, which focuses on addressing the underlying causes of criminal behavior and providing offenders with skills and support to become law-abiding citizens.
Trying to fix the problem, not just punish it.
And closely related is reintegration, which aims to ease the transition of former inmates back into society, providing them with opportunities for employment and social inclusion to reduce recidivism.
Okay, so a whole spectrum of different goals we might be trying to achieve through punishment. And different approaches often prioritize some goals over others. This leads us to Packer's influential models of criminal justice. The crime control model versus the due process model. These sound like two fundamentally different sets of values at play within the justice system.
They represent two distinct and often competing sets of priorities. The crime control model prioritizes the protection of the community and the efficient processing of criminal cases.
Speed and efficiency.
Exactly. It emphasizes speed and finality in the legal process, often operating under a sort of presumption of guilt for those who are brought before the system. The primary goal is to suppress criminal activity as swiftly and effectively as possible, like an assembly line, some critics say.
Okay. Conversely, the due process model places a paramount emphasis on protecting the rights of the accused at every stage of the legal process, even if this means a less efficient system and the possibility that a factually guilty person might be acquitted.
Right. Ensuring the integrity of the legal process and the lawful acquisition of evidence are central tenets of this model. Think of it more like an obstacle course, designed with checks and balances.
So a real tension there.
Exactly. It's a fundamental tension between the imperative to maintain public safety and the commitment to safeguarding individual liberties. Different countries, and indeed different elements within a single legal system, will often fall somewhere along a continuum between these two idealized models.
Right. It's not always purely one or the other.
Not usually, no. Our sources mention the four main legal traditions: common law, civil law, Islamic law, and socialist law, and offer examples like the UK, France, China, and Saudi Arabia to illustrate how different countries embody these traditions while also emphasizing that all real-world systems exist on a spectrum between crime control and due process ideals.
This makes me think about the perennial debate, the political arguments about whether a society is being hard or soft on crime. It seems like a really subjective and complex question.
It is indeed defining and objectively measuring hardness and softness on crime is far from straightforward. It depends entirely on what you measure.
How?
Well, if we consider incarceration rates, the United States has a significantly higher rate compared to many other democratic nations, which might lead some to argue that the U.S. is hard on crime.
Okay, by that metric.
But if we compare the U.S. system to those of some authoritarian regimes that still employ corporal punishment or have drastically different sentencing practices, we might appear relatively soft.
Ah, right, compared to those systems. So it really depends on the specific metrics you're looking at and the specific countries or systems you're using as a point of comparison.
Exactly. It's all about perspective and the chosen benchmarks.
Perceptions of whether a justice system is hard or soft are heavily influenced by the specific criteria used for evaluation and the particular context of the comparison.
Precisely.
So to kind of bring it all together, we've seen how philosophical ideas ranging from the bleakness of nihilism to the societal focus of utilitarianism aren't just abstract concepts confined to dusty textbooks.
No, not at all.
They can be powerfully explored and critiqued through literature like Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, giving us a visceral understanding of their potential consequences.
And we've examined how various philosophical underpinnings have shaped our understanding of why we punish and the diverse goals we attempt to achieve through our justice systems. From the retributive notion of just deserts and the preventative aims of deterrence and incapacitation
Right.
to the restorative ideals of rehabilitation and reintegration.
It's clear that the study of corrections isn't simply about implementing policies and procedures. It's deeply intertwined with fundamental assumptions about human nature, morality, and our core ideological beliefs about the role of the state and the rights of the individual.
Absolutely. And this raises a crucial question really for you, the listener, to ponder. Considering the various justifications and models of punishment we've explored today, and reflecting on how literature can illuminate the profound human impact of these different approaches, what do you believe is the ultimate purpose of our justice system?
Yeah, what should it be aiming for?
And how do different approaches to crime and corrections ultimately reflect our underlying values as a society? Consider that delicate balance between ensuring community safety, upholding individual rights, and fostering the potential for positive change.